Judge Prescott thought he could silence Pam Bondi with a fine. He never expected her to dismantle his entire argument in front of everyone. The courthouse in Tampa, Florida had seen its fair share of legal battles, but on this particular morning, no one could have predicted the storm that was about to unfold. Pam Bondi, sharp as ever, stepped through the heavy wooden doors, briefcase in one hand, the other adjusting the lapel of her blazers. He was here for what should have been a routine hearing, one she could argue in her sleep as she made her way to the defendant's table. She felt the judge's eyes on her before he even spoke. Judge Prescott, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor, was staring not at her face, but at something just below her collarbone. A simple gold crossed the air and the courtroom shifted. A quiet stillness, then in a tone as sharp as a gavel strike. Prescott cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Miss Bondi, I must remind you that religious symbols have no place in my courtroom." Pam barely blinked. "Your Honor, you're wearing a cross that violates the neutrality of the space. You'll need to remove it or face a fine." A murmur rippled through the few spectators in attendance. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. The clerk darted a glance at the judge, then back at Pam. This wasn't the first time a judge had tried to assert control over his courtroom in an unusual way, but it was the first time anyone had thought to find a lawyer over a necklace. Pam didn't move. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, but my cross is no different than a wedding ring or a locket with a family photo inside." Judge Prescott's face remained unreadable. "That's not how I see it." He sighed as if already growing tired of the discussion. "Either remove it or I'll have to issue a fine for disregarding courtroom neutrality." For the first time in her career, Pam Bondi found herself fined, not for misconduct, not for a procedural violation, but for wearing a piece of jewelry. The fine wasn't the issue, it was what it represented. She didn't take off the cross. Instead, she folded her hands over her briefcase, her expression cool. She wasn't about to let this go. "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to address this issue formally." Judge Prescott raised a brow. "Address it? Yes, I'll be filing an objection, and would like to state my argument on record." The judge smirked, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Miss Bondi, I'm sure you're aware that this hearing is about a business dispute, not your personal grievances." Pam didn't flinch. "I'm also aware that the First Amendment doesn't take a recess for personal opinions that got his attention." He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard. The room was now on edge, not because of a legal battle over a contract, but because a seasoned attorney had just challenged a judge's authority. To his face, Pam knew she was walking a thin line, but backing down wasn't an option. "You're finding me for wearing a cross. Let's break that down legally, shall we?" The judge exhaled, rubbing his temples. But before he could respond, Pam was already reaching into her briefcase. She wasn't just going to argue. She was about to dismantle his entire premise. But Judge Prescott didn't realize just how deep of a hole he had started digging for himself. Pam pulled out a single sheet of paper from her briefcase, placing it carefully on the table in front of her. She didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate. Every second of silence was another tightening of the tension in the room. Judge Prescott sighed. "Miss Bondi, I don't have time for theatrics." Pam didn't blink. "Neither do I, Your Honor. But what I do have is a firm understanding of constitutional law." The judge leaned forward, his fingers laced together as if bracing for whatever was coming next. "You're finding me for wearing a cross, claiming it violates courtroom neutrality. But tell me, Your Honor, what legal precedent are you basing that on?" The room was silent. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys. The bailiff barely shifted in his seat. Judge Prescott let out a slow breath. "This courtroom operates under my authority." Bondi. Pam nodded. "It does, but that authority is not above the Constitution." She tapped the paper in front of her, and under the First Amendment, personal religious expression is protected, especially when it does not disrupt proceedings. The judge scoffed. "You're an attorney, not a law professor." Pam smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then let's talk case law, shall we?" She picked up the paper. Tinker Vish Des Moines, 1969, a landmark case that established that individuals do not shed their constitutional rights when they enter a government institution Whether that's a school or a courtroom, Judge Prescott's jaw tightened just slightly. He knew that case. Everyone in the legal field did. Pam didn't stop West. Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett 1943. The Supreme Court ruled that compelling individuals to remove or hide symbols of personal belief is a violation of their First Amendment rights. She set the paper down. Now, Your Honor, would you like me to keep going, or would you prefer to reconsider that? Fine. The judge's fingers